two mics.
We have extra mics in case of a hardware failure. So good morning everyone, thanks for coming. So I hope you've been enjoying the show, I said you did. And it's very good to see you again, Natsuno-san. It's been a year. And yes, and a lot has happened. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the evolution of global markets, ecosystem, and also about a little bit about what you're doing with Japanese startup companies and tech companies. We're going to talk a bit about your private life as well. So that's your heart, and let's catch it. So I'd like to ask you, basically it's been a year since our last interview, and what do you see had been the biggest changes on the global mobile market from your point of view?
As I told you in the last year, the big power shift is taking place. Real value, which is from the telco mindset to internet mindset. If you look at the major players in the telco services, especially in mobile spaces, the name of the companies are all internet-based companies. 5 years ago, we didn't have any name like Apple or Google, but now Apple and Google, these two guys are the biggest power in the mobile space now. And this is a power shift took place, and we hardly see Nokia name anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Like European makers, I was like doing a quick review, so being from Europe myself after close to markets, and so Nokia is having some trouble in various markets, especially China. They partner with Microsoft. Other makers such as Sagem, Alcatel, for those of you who remember those, are now part of TCL, a Chinese company. So the mobile business has really shifted from like Europe. The Japanese market was very isolated but very strong, and now the power is shifting towards, as you said, internet and US and hardware companies. How is the Japanese market doing in that respect? So Matsumoto-san mentioned that smartphones are gaining ground. How are telcos especially reacting to Android or iPhone in Japan?
Actually, telcos in Japan started to change their business model from high return to low risk, low return. Formerly, they didn't get any, suitable handset from the manufacturer without taking a risk. That's why, they spend huge money for subsidy, huge money even for the development. And that's what I have done when I was in the telco industry. By spending a lot of money, I developed our own service, and because it's successful, I got huge return from the market. Right? Not myself, but the company. That's a big problem, actually. But anyway, so that was the rule of the game in early 2000. But after 2007, because the government intervened the business model of telcos, and the telco management started to think, I want to keep this profit. I don't want to save the cost. Then, smartphone came out at the same time, and they thought, oh, this is low risk model. Without subsidy, without the development cost, they would provide a great handset to us with cheaper price. So telco-oriented new service development has been stopped for these 3 years. And all the new services are coming from the Apple and Google right now, as all other world are doing.
So Japan had a very advanced mobile network before a lot of other countries, and they were, because of that, isolated and working mostly with Japanese makers. And that was what was called the Galapagos syndrome. So since telcos now are relying on global vendors increasingly, what's happening to Japanese manufacturers?
Actually, early last year, they heavily depend on the global players like Samsung and the HTC. But these phones, including Sony Ericsson, Xperia, but these phones are not selling very well. And they started to order Japanese manufacturers to ship smartphones as well in late last year. So end of last year to this year, so many Japanese manufacturers started to make a converged smartphones, which means using the Android OS, but the embedded the wallet phone capability by using the Fedica technology, or all the unique services like digital TV services, which is embedded to the all the feature phones in Japan. Last year, we didn't have any feature, just a smartphone. But now we have a converged smartphones which cannot be used outside of Japan because digital TV is unique to them. So it's very ironical situation is taking place in the first half of last year. Everybody thought global standard would be welcome, but now they start to think we need a uniqueness. We need a uniqueness.
So what you're saying is that basically Japanese phones were already very advanced and had functions that iPhone didn't have, such as the digital TV, which is very common on Japanese handsets, the contactless payment, like NFC type of technology. And so what you're saying is that Japanese telcos are taking the smartphones and taking them to their level of sophistication by adding functions.
Exactly. That took place not by telcos, but by the manufacturers, because telcos are not taking risks, not trying to take a risk anymore.
Okay.
So from the manufacturer's point of view, to compete with global players, they started to attach Japanese unique services. And especially after the earthquake, all the Japanese feature phones are having emergency alert service. So if the earthquake is coming, you get alert 15 seconds earlier. Only 15 seconds. But by having 15 seconds, you can prepare, right? And no smartphones are compliant to that service. So after the big earthquake last month, everybody started to think some unique features would be necessary. Very ironical.
It's really interesting to see that basically Japanese makers are adding some sophisticated features on basically continuing to evolve what smartphones have become overseas. I'd like to switch the topic to the content market. So just a little bit before, Matsumoto-san from SoftBank was mentioning that content is great and it's very good to have companies doing well with content, but for telcos it's a small part of their business. So they're very happy to have content providers doing well. And in the second generation of third generation of networks, we've seen different companies succeed. So second generation was like ringtones, download games. Then third generation, we've seen in Japan mobile social networks, mobile games, a bit of mobile commerce. We heard Tanaka-san from Green, we heard Moriyasu-san from DNA. They're doing really well, right? They're like $7 billion companies in the stock market. They're buying companies overseas. Japan is introducing 4G, like the real 4G, not the one that they promote in US. That was rebranded by the ITU. Do you have ideas of what could succeed with like broadband?
From the content player's perspective, in the second generation, nobody thought the mobile internet can be successful. That's why newcomers like the startup companies took a risk and they took the return. But in third generation, not anymore, because everybody believed successful mobile internet. But still, there is and there was some difference between PC-based internet and mobile-based internet, especially in Japan. Carriers, telcos are providing a very great, excellent billing system to them. So even in the third generation, almost all the content players are heavily depending on the carriers, telcos billing system. That was the reason of the success of Japanese content players. And the 4G, after having the power of telcos expires, maybe the total migration of a PC-based internet content player and the mobile-based internet content player will take place, because otherwise, no space already remaining, and with less telco power, only mobile-based internet player cannot survive anymore. So a conversion of the PC-based internet and mobile-based internet as a player.
Would services, I know Evernote, for example, is very popular in Japan. I don't know how popular it is in China. Maybe I'll do a quick raise of hand. So anyone here using Evernote internet internet service on mobile, so I'm using it. Anybody else? A few Evernote users. Okay. So Docomo has invested in that company and is now pre-installing it in pretty much all phones, because for them, they don't really care about making money from the service. What they care about is the traffic it generates. They want to create as much traffic as possible. So would you say that this is one of the convergent services, or do you have other examples?
I think, I can see a lot of an example in the cloud-based services. In my case, I'm using a Gmail and the Google Calendar and all the, cloud-based services like Twitter and everything. And sometimes I'm tweeting from here, and I'm often tweet from the iPad. And I share my calendar with different devices. And for the Google as a content provider, they don't care the device. Of course, Android team would care the device, but the Google as a company, they don't care the device, right? As far as I'm using Google service, they are happy. So these kind of tendencies would happen, and especially in 4G and the iPad or PAD type of devices, there will be less difference between PC-based internet and mobile-based internet anymore, right? So here, I don't bring PC anymore for one-day trip or two-day trip. I just go to my iPad. No PC anymore. Maybe I'm regarding this as a PC.
Okay. I have also questions regarding how you see China fitting in the picture. Because I mentioned that on the hardware side, Chinese companies are becoming really strong. Now they're also building Android devices. Yesterday, the CEO of MediaTek was there talking about how basically feature phones are becoming smartphones by having Android on top of the MTK platform. The GSM World Congress, there was also a lot of Chinese-made Android phones. Here, if you go around, you see on the Huawei booth, they have a few Android phones that look also very good. So, how do you see the market evolving with Android versus iPhone versus other OS?
I think OS-wise, Android is anyway free, right? And the Apple OS, iOS is exclusive to Apple. So for other manufacturers, there would be no chance to use iOS. That means, everybody will use Android because it's free. And the OS is really costly, right? So if one company is trying to make a phones, to develop OS is too risky. And as far as it's free, it's great. Right? And the differentiation would come from the hardware side or specification side of the phones rather than OS. So I think just like with the PC market, maybe 90% Android, 10% iPhone, but as a company, Apple would be almost number one as a single manufacturer. And then Android, we have more than 100 manufacturers, clouded. So this kind of situation would take place by 2020.
I also know that you were discussing earlier, and you were saying that you're on the board of something like 10 or 12 companies in Japan, or maybe in other countries. Can you talk a bit about which companies you work with, and especially the mobile ones?
I'm doing a board member job for 12 companies right now, 6 public and 6 private. And also, I'm doing a board member job for W3C, which is Worldwide Web Consortium, which standardizes HTML5 and other things. And the one thing I want to mention, especially here in China, is the presence of Chinese players, especially in the handset side and the computer side, hardware side, and also content side, are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But in the standardization space, there is very little people working and contributing to the standardization process. So majority of the standardization process were led by US people, especially in the internet space, US people. But they welcome your contribution. They welcome Asian contribution. So I think we should contribute more to the worldwide standardization process, because by doing so, that will be really big benefit for Chinese global players to go up abroad. And also, we should include some agencies of user interface or some specification to the browser. Then, we will be happier. So, I'm sorry, I jumped in the standardization story. It's going to be very, very important thing.
Back actually to the startup side, you're the board of 12 companies. Which ones have services that maybe you could introduce that people maybe haven't heard of or that you find really interesting on mobile?
On mobile, I'm a board member of Lee. Also, I'm board member.
We heard of this one yesterday. It's quite famous.
And I'm also board member of Sega as a game player. And also, I'm a board member of the company called Duango, who is providing us unique video streaming services in Japan, which is almost equally competing with YouTube and Ustream. And it's fun because we are generating new services almost every year from different companies, right? But the problem is, again, globalization. Almost all the Japanese companies are based on Japan, like Chinese companies, especially in the content space. But it's a kind of losing opportunities. In the world, many people are waiting for new innovation, and not only from the US, but also from China and Japan.
It's a very valid point. I mean, Chinese market, the Japanese market are a strong enough market to sustain a lot of companies. But like yesterday, we had Peter Westerbacka from Rovio Angry Birds, who's a company based in Finland. They're 80 guys, and I think they're making $20 million a quarter. Of course, most of their sales overseas. What do you think is preventing content providers of going global from Japan or from China?
Mainly because of the two things, which is, one is capital flow, and the other one is human resource flow. Means, if you go abroad, it's going to take heavy risk, and risk money will be necessary. And in China, I can see a lot of NGO type of investors, but in Japan, it's hardly risky. So without money, nobody can take a risk, right? So risk money would be really important. And the other one is human resource flow. Human resource flow means, not necessarily the startup entrepreneur would be suitable for global business, right? If to make the zero company to one would be very difficult, but to make the one company to 100 would be even more difficult. And we don't have to stick to one guy leading all the process, right? Maybe we need to change or switch the person, especially at the CEO level. But in Japan, at least, that kind of human resource flow is not existing. So these two values would be the very big value for Japanese companies, and this, to some extent, Chinese companies are seeing.
Okay. I think we're about to run out of time, so I'd like to conclude with just one final question. But so you come to China, I know you come regularly, and what do you learn from China, and what do you expect to learn from the event?
I think these kind of events to be really, really important because all these kind of conferences used to be led by U.S. players or European players who are not necessarily understand the real market. But this conference is led by Chinese and some Japanese as well. And we are providing a lot of information to the world, right? So I think to make this kind of conference bigger and bigger, and to invite more powerful guests from all over the world would be really important, and it should be held in China.
Takeshi, Natsuno, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.